Right now, somewhere in your life, there is a person you have stopped paying attention to. Maybe you muted their messages. Maybe you stopped replying as fast as you used to. Maybe you convinced yourself they don't matter anymore, that they're just background noise in a life full of louder, shinier distractions. But I need you to stop scrolling for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to tell you is going to change the way you see every single person you've been quietly dismissing. And by the end of this video, you are going to feel a chill run down your spine when you realize exactly who I'm talking about. Because this isn't a video about romance or luck or coincidence. This is a video about something far bigger than that. Something that most people go their entire lives without ever understanding. And if you skip this, you might miss the one sign that was meant to change the direction of your life forever. Let me start with something that might sound strange at first. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some people are lessons, some people are seasons. But every once in a while, a person shows up who is not a lesson, not a season, but a door. A door to a version of your life you haven't even imagined yet. And the cruel irony is that these people almost never arrive wrapped in fireworks and flashing lights. They arrive quietly. They arrive in the most unremarkable way possible, so unremarkable that your mind, trained to chase excitement and drama, completely overlooks them. That is exactly why you're watching this video right now. Somewhere in you, a part that is wiser than your conscious mind already knows, there is someone you have been ignoring, someone who does not fit the story you thought your life was supposed to follow, and that part of you is asking you to pay attention before it's too late. I want to tell you about a woman named Mira, and I want you to listen closely, because her story is more common than you think, and there's a very good chance a piece of it is your story too. Mira had a co-worker who used to greet her every single morning with the same tired joke about the coffee machine being broken. Every single day, without fail. She barely looked up from her phone when he spoke. She thought of him as forgettable, a background character in the movie of her life. The kind of person you nod at and instantly forget. For 2 years, she brushed past him without a second thought, chasing promotions, chasing people who impressed her more, chasing a life she thought she was supposed to want. Then one ordinary Tuesday, he mentioned, almost in passing, that he used to run a small business before the company hired him, something about renewable energy consulting. Mira barely registered it at the time, but 18 months later, after being let go in a wave of layoffs, desperate and unsure of her next move, she remembered that offhand comment. She reached out. That one conversation turned into a partnership, and that partnership turned into a company that changed the entire trajectory of her career and her life. The man she had ignored for 2 years, dismissed as unremarkable, forgettable, background noise, turned out to be the single most important person she would meet in her adult life. And here's the part that still gives her chills when she tells the story. He told her, years later, that he almost didn't take the job at that company at all. If he had listened to his own doubts, they never would have met. Stay with me, because this is where it gets interesting. And if you've made it this far, I don't think that's an accident. I think you're here because something in you already suspects there is a mirror story unfolding in your own life right now, and you're trying to figure out who that person is before you lose your chance. Across almost every spiritual tradition, there is a concept that keeps reappearing in different forms, wearing different names, but always pointing at the same idea. Some call it a soul contract. Some call it a karmic thread. Some simply call it destiny. The idea is this: before you were even born, certain connections were already written into the fabric of your life. Not soulmates in the romantic sense that movies love to sell you, but what some traditions call way showers, people whose entire purpose in your story is to open a door you would never have found on your own. These connections are rarely loud, they are rarely obvious. In fact, the universe, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, seems to have a strange sense of humor about this, because it tends to disguise the most important people as the least impressive ones. It hides your breakthrough inside your boredom. It hides your miracle inside your monotony. And because we live in a culture obsessed with instant excitement, obsessed with people who dazzle us in the first 5 seconds, we develop a dangerous habit of writing off the very people who were sent to change everything. Now, here's a question I want you to actually sit with, not just hear and forget. Who in your life right now do you find yourself ignoring? Not because they've done anything wrong, but simply because they don't excite you. Who is it that texts you and you leave on read for 3 days? Who is it that tries to talk to you and you find some polite excuse to cut the conversation short? Hold that person in your mind for a second. Don't dismiss the first name that pops up, even if it surprises you, even if it's someone you'd never expect. I promise you, by the end of this video, that name is going to mean something very different to you. Because here's the truth, almost nobody tells you, the people who are meant to change your life rarely look like main characters when they first appear. They look like footnotes. They look like side characters. They look like the coworker with the bad coffee joke, the neighbor you wave to but never actually talk to, the old classmate who keeps commenting on your posts, even though you haven't spoken in years, the quiet friend who never asks for anything and therefore gets forgotten the fastest. We are wired, almost against our own interest, to give our attention to whoever is the loudest, the most demanding, the most dramatic. And so we spend our energy chasing people who take and give nothing back, while the person quietly standing at the edge of our life, offering something real, gets ignored simply because they never demanded to be noticed. Let me tell you about another story, because I think you need more than one example before this truly sinks in. There was a man named Daniel who used to volunteer at a small community center on weekends, mostly because his mother guilted him into it. Every Saturday, an elderly man named Rosario would sit in the same corner, sipping the same cup of weak coffee, telling the same handful of stories about a small hardware business he used to run decades earlier. Most of the younger volunteers avoided him. His stories were long, his hearing was bad, and conversations with him took 3 times as long as they should have. Daniel avoided him too, for almost a year, always finding a reason to help someone else first. Then, one Saturday, short on volunteers, Daniel got stuck sitting next to Rosario for 2 hours. Out of politeness more than interest, he asked a single follow-up question about the old business. That single question opened up a conversation that changed the next decade of his life. Rosario, it turned out, still owned the building his old shop had operated in, sitting empty for years, and he had been quietly looking for someone patient enough, someone who actually listened, to take it over and bring it back to life. Daniel almost said no. He tells people now that the version of him who avoided Rosario for a year was standing right next to the version of him who built an entire career from that one conversation, and only one of them was paying attention. Notice what these 2 stories have in common. In both cases, the life-changing person was available for a long time before anything happened. Mira worked beside her future business partner for 2 years. Daniel avoided Rosario for almost 12 months. The opportunity was never hidden. It was simply overlooked, buried under the assumption that anything this important should announce itself more loudly. That assumption is the exact trap I want you to recognize in your own life. Because right now, today, there is very likely someone sitting in your version of that community center corner, patiently waiting for you to finally ask one real question. If you're starting to feel a little uncomfortable right now, good. That discomfort is not an accident. That discomfort is your intuition finally getting a word in after being drowned out for years by noise, distraction, and other people's opinions about who deserves your attention. Let that discomfort sit there for a moment, because we are just getting started. And what comes next is going to make you think back on specific moments, specific conversations, specific people in a completely different light. Let's talk about the signs. Not vague, feel-good, horoscope column signs, but the real, recognizable patterns that tend to show up when a chosen connection is trying to get your attention and you keep looking the other way. The first sign is repetition without explanation. This is the person whose name keeps appearing in your life in ways that don't seem to have a logical reason. You unfollow them, and somehow their name comes up in conversation 2 days later. You haven't spoken in months, and then you have a dream about them, and the next morning they message you out of nowhere. This isn't superstition. Pay attention to what keeps circling back into your orbit, uninvited, unprompted, over and over again. The universe does not usually shout, it repeats. And if you keep dismissing the repetition as coincidence, you might be dismissing the one message that was meant to wake you up. The second sign is the feeling of unexplainable ease. Not excitement, not butterflies, not the dizzy high of infatuation, but ease, a strange, quiet comfort around someone that doesn't match how little history you have with them. You find yourself being more honest with this person than you are with people you've known for years. You don't perform around them, you don't feel the need to impress them. And because our culture tells us that love and connection are supposed to feel like fireworks, we mistake this quiet ease for boredom, when in reality, it is one of the rarest and most valuable feelings a human connection can offer. The third sign is that they show up during your low points, not your high points. Anyone can enjoy your company when your life is going well, but pay close attention to who reaches out when you're struggling. Who checks in without being asked? Who notices the version of you that isn't shiny or impressive or performing for anyone? These are not the people chasing your highlight reel. These are the people who see you, the real you, and choose to stay anyway. If you've been brushing off someone who has shown up for you during hard times because they don't fit some fantasy version of who should be in your life, I want you to pause and think about that person right now, because that pattern alone might be the loudest sign you've been given. The fourth sign is what I call the friction of avoidance. This one is strange, but if you've experienced it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Sometimes the person who is meant to change your life is someone you actively avoid, not because you dislike them, but because some part of you senses how significant they could become, and that scares you. You find excuses not to reply. You downplay the connection to your friends. You tell yourself it's nothing, it's not a big deal, when the truth is, it feels like a big deal. And that's exactly why you're running from it. Fear disguises itself as indifference far more often than people realize. The fifth sign is synchronicity around timing. This person enters or re-enters your life at a moment that makes absolutely no logical sense, unless you consider that maybe, just maybe, timing is not as random as we like to believe. Right after a breakup, right after you lose a job, right after you've prayed, or wished, or simply whispered into the dark that you needed something to change. If someone walked into your life at a moment that still gives you goosebumps when you think about it, that timing was not decoration. It was a message. There is a sixth sign, and I saved it for last on purpose, because it's the one people resist the most. The sixth sign is that this person makes you feel a little bit exposed, not unsafe, not threatened, but seen in a way that is almost uncomfortable, as if they can tell when you're performing and when you're not. Most people in your life only ever meet the version of you that you curate for them, the polished, edited version. The people who are meant to matter tend to see past that curation almost immediately. And that can feel unsettling if you're used to controlling how you're perceived. So instead of leaning into that discomfort, most people retreat from it. They label the person too intense or too much, or simply distance themselves without ever admitting why. If there is someone in your life who makes you feel unusually exposed, unusually known, I want you to consider the possibility that your discomfort is not a red flag. It might be the exact opposite. Now, stay with me, because I know exactly what's happening in your mind right now. Some of you have already thought of 2 or 3 names while listening to this. Some of you are torn between people, unsure which one this video is actually pointing toward. And a few of you, if I'm honest, are starting to feel a little defensive, telling yourselves this doesn't apply to you, that your situation is different, that the person who came to mind couldn't possibly be significant because of some very logical, very reasonable excuse you've already built in your head. I want to gently challenge that excuse, because in both of the stories I told you, the person involved had a perfectly reasonable excuse too. Mira had her career ambitions. Daniel had his packed schedule. Reasonable excuses are not evidence that you're wrong. Sometimes they are simply the shape fear takes when it doesn't want to be recognized as fear. Now, before I go any further, I want to give you a turning point, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, this is nice, this is interesting, but where is this actually going? So let me be direct with you for a second. This video is not just about identifying a person. It's about a decision you're going to have to make. And most people watching this will not make it. And that is exactly why most people never get the life-changing chapter this connection was meant to open for them. Here's the uncomfortable part. Recognizing the signs is not enough. You can watch every spiritual video on this platform, collect every sign, nod along with every word, and still walk away and do absolutely nothing different. Because acknowledging a truth and acting on a truth are 2 completely different things, and the space between them is where most people's most important connections quietly die of neglect. Mira almost lost her chance. If she had waited even a few more months to reach out, her old coworker might have moved on, taken another opportunity, disappeared into the version of her life where they never crossed paths again. The window was not permanent. It never is. So, here's what I want you to actually do. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today, ideally within the next hour of finishing this video. Think of the name that came to mind earlier, the one you tried to brush off, the one that surprised you a little. I want you to send them one message. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to explain any of this. It can be as simple as, "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How have you been?" That's it. That one small, unremarkable action is often the exact thing that reopens a door the universe has been quietly holding open for you, waiting patiently for you to finally walk through it. Let's go back to Mira for a second, because there's a detail I left out earlier, and it changes everything. When she finally reached out to her old coworker, she almost didn't send the message. She typed it, stared at it for almost 10 minutes, deleted half of it, rewrote it, and nearly closed the app entirely. What stopped her wasn't confidence. It was a strange, specific thought that crossed her mind in that moment. If I don't send this, I will wonder about it for the rest of my life. That single thought was enough to override the hesitation. I want you to borrow that thought right now, because it's more useful than any amount of certainty could ever be. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel sure. You only need one thought, strong enough to outweigh the fear of staying silent. And for most people, that thought is exactly the one Mira had. The fear of wondering forever is worse than the fear of being wrong. There's also a reason so many of these stories seem to hinge on such a small, almost invisible moment. A question asked out of politeness. A message typed and nearly deleted. A single Saturday shift that wasn't supposed to matter. That's not a coincidence, and it's not poetic exaggeration either. Life-changing connections are rarely built on grand gestures. They're built on small, repeatable choices to stay present with someone, instead of mentally checking out. Anyone can be swept up by a grand gesture. It takes something else entirely to notice value in a person who never asked to be noticed in the first place. And that is exactly the quality that separates the people who find their chosen connections from the people who spend their whole lives waiting for a sign so dramatic it can't be ignored, never realizing the sign already came and went quietly, weeks or months or years ago. Now, I promised you a twist, and here it is. Because I don't think this video would be honest if I stopped where most videos like this stop. So far we've been talking about someone else, someone out there that you've been ignoring. But there is another person hiding in this story, and it's someone you've been ignoring even longer, someone you've dismissed even more completely than anyone else in your life. That person is you. Think about it. How many times have you had an idea, a spark of intuition, a quiet nudge towards something different, and you talked yourself out of it within seconds because it didn't seem impressive enough, didn't seem loud enough, didn't seem like the kind of thing worth pursuing? You do to yourself exactly what you do to the people you overlook. You wait for the version of yourself that feels exciting, dramatic, main character energy, and you ignore the quiet, steady, unremarkable version of yourself that has actually been trying to lead you somewhere real this entire time. The chosen one in this story was never only about someone else walking into your life. It was also about you finally choosing to listen to the parts of yourself you've been silencing because they weren't loud enough to demand your attention. And this is the part where I need you to really lean in, because this is the piece that ties everything together. Somewhere, right now, there is a person who is looking at you the exact same way you've been looking at the name that came to mind earlier in this video. Someone thinks you're the unremarkable coworker with the bad coffee joke. Someone thinks your quiet consistency, your steady presence, your unglamorous reliability is actually the rarest thing they've encountered in years. You are to someone else, the chosen one they have been too distracted to notice. Let that sit with you for a second. You are not just searching for the door in your own life. You might already be the door in someone else's. If you've made it this far into the video, I want to be honest with you about something. Most people click away long before this point. They get bored, they get distracted. They assume they already know where a video like this is going, and they leave right before the part that actually matters. But you didn't leave. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. I think some part of you needed to hear this today. Needed a reminder that the most important chapters of your life rarely arrive with a soundtrack and a spotlight. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary moments, ordinary people, ordinary Tuesdays, waiting patiently for you to finally stop scrolling past them. So let's bring this all together. There is a difference between the people who pass through your life and the people who are meant to change the direction of it entirely. The ones who change everything rarely look like it at first. They look forgettable. They look inconvenient. They look like distractions from the life you thought you were building, when in reality, they are the foundation of the life you were actually meant to have. The signs are rarely loud: repetition without explanation, unexplainable ease, presence during your lowest moments, the strange friction of avoidance, timing that feels too precise to be random. And underneath all of it, the hardest sign to admit, the quiet nudge inside yourself that you have been ignoring longer than anyone else. I want to leave you with one last thought before you go, because I think it matters more than anything else in this video. You do not need a sign written in the sky. You do not need certainty or proof or some dramatic confirmation before you're allowed to act. All you need is the willingness to send one message, take one step, give one more chance to the person or the version of yourself that you have been quietly overlooking. That is how every single life-changing connection actually begins. Not with fireworks, with a small, quiet, almost forgettable decision to finally pay attention. If this video meant something to you, if a name came to mind while you were watching, or if you realized you've been ignoring a part of yourself for far too long, I want you to do 3 things before you leave. Type that name in the comments, even just their initials if you'd rather keep it private, because I promise you, you are not the only one who thought of someone during this video. Hit like on this video, not for me, but as a small signal to yourself that you're ready to start paying attention to the quiet signs you've been missing. And if you want more messages like this one, subscribe, because there are more stories, more signs, and more turning points coming. And I have a feeling you're exactly the kind of person who needs to hear them, because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you to finally notice them. And somewhere in here, a version of you is waiting for the same thing. Don't let either of them wait much longer.